Hello, thank you so much for joining us today for the annual budget processing refresher course. Doug Meese, our Senior Software Support Specialist, will be leading the session today. Thank you, Doug. I think I'll just pass it on to you.
All right, sounds good. All right. So, like Kate said, this is the annual budgeting refresher course. So today we're going to be going over some of the pitfalls that you may encounter during budget processing, and just some tips and tricks in order to make your budgeting experience go smoothly. The course has been designed around the idea that most of you have previously done annual budgeting work, but since it's usually just once a year process for you, we felt like it was a good idea to compile some useful reminders to make sure that you have an easy time with it. So one of the most common scenarios that I'm going to go over concerns the budget years. It's possible to have more than one budget year's worth of work open at the same time by initializing one or more funds for more than 1 year at the same time using the initialization screen. So what will happen is you'll have multiple budget years worth of data open at the same time, and this can cause some confusion if you aren't careful. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So on our initialization screen, you'll notice that we can initialize for 2017, 18, and 19. And the years that are available is based on your current budget year that you have set in your company FM settings, which I'll show you in a couple minutes. So it goes 2 years out from the current budget year that you've got set, and you can initialize one or more funds for any years that you want. You don't have to initialize all of your funds at the same time, and you can have the same fund initialized for more than 1 year at a time. So this is the main place that it can get a little tricky. So I'm just going to go ahead and initialize a few of these and then switch to a different year to illustrate what I'm talking about. Okay, a few of these didn't initialize because they don't have any accounts. That's fine. So we'll just go to 18 and then grab the same block and push those over. Okay, so you will get a warning if you try to initialize for another year out that you still have open budgets for the previous year. So obviously you can accept it if you know the risks. In order to fully remove budget information for a year after you're done with it, that's what the Final Adopt feature is under the budget adoption page, which we can get to later. So that's one way to sort of keep your budget work clean by final adopting previous years. So what I was going to talk about here is actually on the budget maintenance screen first and foremost. When you go into your budget maintenance, it'll show you all of your organization sets that you've got open and ready to be worked on. The problem is you don't know what year you're looking at. So the big thing that I wanted to mention here was the Show Search feature. If you click on that, it'll open this little search panel that lets you narrow down what you're looking at. And the most important thing to observe here is that you can choose between any years that you have any open work in. So you don't really need to worry about this if you're sure you've only got 1 year open at a time. And only years that you've got open budget information available in will actually show up here for selection. So, if you go here and you click on it and you see stuff from 2012 or 2013 or just any time that's, a long time ago and you're confident that you're closed, it may be good to go in and make sure to final adopt everything out of those previous years just to get it cleaned up. So by doing this and actually searching, we'll make sure that we're actually looking at your budget organizations for the year that you want to look at. I've had calls where people have entered in numbers for the wrong years because they haven't done this, so it's just a really good idea to do. The budget year dropdown is available on other pages as well in annual budgeting, such as the budget advancement. Fortunately, you don't have to click a button to make it appear. So it's much more obvious what you're doing in terms of which year you're targeting, but it's still a good idea to just glance up at it and make sure that you're working on the right year before you do anything, because Advancing your budget is a one-way street. You can't unadvance your budget back down to a previous level. And it's also present in the mass spread and adopt areas as well. So just anywhere the budget year drop-down menu shows up, it's just good to take a look at it. So what I was going to say about the company FM settings, where you can dictate what years are available for initialization, you go into maintenance and then financial management and then company FM settings. And then you go over to your annual budget settings tab, and right here you'll see your current budget year. So we've got 2017 plugged in, so that is what determines what years are available for you. Okay. So another common problem, if a user will go to adopt their fund for a particular year and then they'll just find out that it's not available in adopt budget. So say we were to go to adopt budget, you're confident that you've got your 100 fund ready to go, but it's not showing up here for whatever reason. You go into your GL account inquiry and all the funds accounts are still showing zeros for the current year. So obviously it hasn't been adopted yet. I've had calls like this where it just turns out that the fund hasn't been adopted, but the user thought it was. The problem is generally that in your advanced processing, and it's going to look different depending on whether you're a school or an or like a town or a ERP organization. I think we're looking at the way schools set it up right now, where it goes by whole funds. But if you're an ERP organization, you'll see individual organization sets belonging to a fund when you're in advanced processing. So what will happen is some users will only advance the organization sets that contain accounts that they've actually done budget work for, and they just sort of assume that any organization sets that they aren't doing anything with, like they're leaving all their accounts as zero in those org sets, that they can just leave them behind. That isn't the case. You have to make sure, in order to be able to adopt your fund, you have to advance every single organization set that's available for the fund up to the very final level. And you'll know if all of your org sets are at the final level if you just go through each of the levels on this level to advance from dropdown, and you don't see any org sets in any of them. Because once you've advanced an org set off of the last level that's available on the dropdown, it'll disappear altogether from the advanced processing because there's nowhere further to advance it to. And then after you're done with that, you can go back into adopt budget and then actually do the budget adoption. But like I said, it looks a little bit different in this view because we're running on a school system rather than one that breaks everything up by the organization sets. So naturally we can just go through here and push our fund all the way up, because I was going to talk about budget advancement next. And at any time, if you need to find out what level anything is at, if you look at your budget maintenance menu, it'll actually tell you what level your budgets, your organization sets are at. Now, I should mention the budget level that it says here, even though it says final adopted, it doesn't mean that it actually is. The only reason it says final adopted here is because that's what the organization in this database has chosen to call their final level, because you can actually declare whatever level names that you want for all of your annual budget levels. So that can be a little misleading. Sometimes it can be a good idea not to call your final level something with the word adopted in it, because that can falsely indicate that your budget's been adopted when it actually hasn't. So on the topic of adopting a budget, there's a couple things to observe on that page. Aside from the budget year, there's the final budget checkbox, and then the post-spread budget checkbox. Now, you're only going to check the final budget checkbox when you're actually ready to sort of set that fund in stone. When you have final budget checked, all the organization sets for that fund are going to disappear out of budget processing for the budget year that you're adopting it for. So you won't be able to do any further annual budgeting work on that fund. So you can still make changes to your budget after it's been adopted in this case, just by using a budget adjustment journal entry. But it's often easier, if you know you're going to be still making some changes after the fact, to just not do the final adopt yet. Because if you just adopt your fund without having final budget checked, it'll put the budget information into those accounts for that budget year, but your organization sets for that fund are still going to be available in budget processing for the time being. And you can go back into the adopt budget screen and then re-adopt later, and it will replace the existing numbers with the new ones that you filled out. Now, if you've done any budget spreads, which I explained in the basics course, but we can go over it again, you want to make sure to have the post-spread budget option checked. Otherwise, when you adopt your fund, the spreads won't actually take place, and all of the money from the accounts that have spread features on them, all the money will just show up in that account on the first day of the first month of the budget year, rather than being spread out on the first of each of the months that you have assigned it to. So I can actually go back over how spreading works real quick. There's actually a mass spread feature if you want to apply a spread to a large number of accounts at the same time. Naturally, you choose your budget year here, and you use these three tabs to filter down which accounts that you want to actually apply the spread to. You can choose these organizations and whatever accounts in those organization sets that you want, and then what you can do is use these spread methods, which are also available on your the budget screen where you're actually filling out the numbers for your accounts. When you hit the spread button at the bottom of that page, the methods that are available there are the same ones that are set up here. So the spread evenly over the year method, that one's pretty self-explanatory. That just divides the amount that the account has up into 12 pieces and evenly allocates it to the first of each of the months. It will round a little bit in order to get whole dollar amounts, but for the most part it'll be fairly evenly spread. The spread based on previous 5-year trend, the system will look at each account and determine on average which month needs the most money and which month needs the least, and then do its spread based on its perception of how much money is needed at any given month. And then spread based on user-defined percentages. This lets us actually declare our own percentage values for the spread here. January will start at 100%, and then as we fill in other months, you'll see January is ticking down from 100% towards whatever amount is left over after you have all the other months filled in. And then after you have that ready, you have to make sure to have items selected. Looks like it's remembered all of our other selections here. And you'll see these little check marks appear on the tabs once you've actually made selections. So you have to have something selected in all three of the tabs, because these are all combined filters that all work in tandem with each other. So we hit spread, and then that applied the spread that I set up to all the accounts. Now, If you want to undo the effects of a spread, you can use the consolidate spread feature, and what that will do is it will just basically unspread the budget and reallocate all the money back to the very first month of the fiscal year. I should mention that the spread feature is really only for reporting and informational purposes. Budget validation, when you do like AP or purchasing activity, when the system checks to see if there's enough money in the budget for the account that you're hitting, it's still going to look at the annualized amount. So the total amount available to the account for the whole year is what it's going to check against, rather than the amount of money that is in the account based on how far through the year you are, if the account has a spread on it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I mean, you can use it for comparative purposes to see if you're staying on track with on a month-by-month basis, but there's nothing in the system that will make it throw out warnings or keep you from doing a transaction based on the monthly spread budget. So with that said, just make sure to adopt your budget with a spread. The post-spread budget option checked in order to actually make those spreads happen. I'm not sure how many customers actually use it, but it is useful and it's relatively easy to do. So, okay, well, that was about everything that I wanted to touch on. I had planned for this to not be quite as long as the basics course, because that was going to cover quite a bit more information and a larger number of topics. So now we can open the floor to any questions that people have asked in the group chat.
Great, Doug. Thank you. I see some coming in right now. The first one is, can the spread be used to do a quarterly spread?
Well, there's no automatic feature that would spread it into quarters. I assume what the user would be doing is, like, if you started in January, you'd get some of the money in January, then April, then July, then October, or something like that. In order to accomplish a spread like that, you just have to hand enter it using the user-defined percentages. So, January, you could do something like this, like 25% in each of these. So you'd have 8 months not receiving any new money, but a quarter of the money goes into each of the first month of a quarter that way. So you just have to do that manually. Obviously, you can key in whatever percentages you like. The 25% was just an example.
Okay, great. The next question is, what happens if you use the 5-year spread but there is less than 5 years of history?
If there's less than 5 years of history, I think it'll just use whatever years are available to extrapolate a pattern. And that seems to be what the system does anywhere else with any of the 5-year trend analysis features. If you're doing the trend analysis, it will show all 5 years, even if you don't have historical information, but it'll show $0 values for those years. But for the spread, most likely what it'll do is it'll only use the years that are actually available to it. I'd have to do some testing to be perfectly confident in that answer, but I mean, you could use your training environment to try that out and see what it comes up with.
Okay, great. Can you do the math spread after the budget is adopted?
You could, provided you didn't do a final adopt. Again, the final adopt feature removes the current budget work that you've done from the annual budgeting process, which is the only place that the budget spread is available. So you'd have to just do a regular adopt, but you could then apply a spread to your items and then adopt again and replace the existing stuff with those new numbers. Now, if you did a final adopt, I guess you could do a spread. You'd just have to do a really, really big budget adjustment journal that splits out the money across multiple months, and you'd just be doing that manually.
Okay, great. The next question is, can you briefly cover the Excel add-in?
Okay, I actually don't have it set up on this machine at the moment, so I can't really use it. But I mean, I could talk about it for a minute, I suppose. What it'll do is the Excel add-in gives you a little button at the top of your Excel interface that lets you pull in your budget data based on some choices that you've made. You know, when you hit the when you activate the add-in, you get a side panel where you key in information about what budget stuff that you want to bring in from Logos. So, you know, you'll specify a budget year, and then you'll specify filters like which budget levels you want to look at and which organization sets and accounts that you want to look at. It'll just bring those into Excel, and then you can just, you know, fill out the numbers in Excel there and then flash it back into Logos that way.
Okay, great. Thank you. What about importing a budget?
Okay. Budget imports are actually fairly easy. You can, once you have your budget initialized for a year, not in forecasting. Oh, that's right. Here we go. You can do a budget import. Now, I believe it'll only let you import budgets for organization sets belonging to funds that you have initialized for. So I've got 101 and a couple other ones initialized here, so we'd only be able to import for those. But what that does, we have a standard Excel spreadsheet format that we allow to be imported into Logos, and you just use this this import interface here in order to do so. You can just browse to your file. I actually don't have a copy of a sample file or anything available. So if a user was working on this, they'd just call in for help, and then we'd take a look at what they were doing. So you just set the budget year that you're working for, and then if you want to override which budget level those numbers come in at, you can use the selector here in order to do that. Now you can only override into a level that hasn't been advanced from yet. So if you're already, say, at council preliminary, you wouldn't be able to do an import to override into finance review or department requested to make corrections for past levels or anything like that. You'd only be able to override into council prelim or anything above that.
Okay, terrific. And then the next, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Oh, I was going to say, Mike, if you were working on doing a budget import, feel free to call our support center, and we can help you out further if you're running into any trouble with it. I just wanted to add that for him since he had asked the question.
Great. Well, the next one is related. Can a file with a personnel budget be imported into budgeting?
Well, I assume by personnel budget, the user's talking about position budgeting, and that's done in human resources. The budget import here only just imports straight numbers right into the accounts themselves. It won't add things like transactions or position budgeting information. I mean, I guess you could use it to manually override a position budgeting account with new numbers if you wanted to, but it's not going to actually create any position budgeting information as far as I know. If the user is looking for more info about position budgeting, they probably want to contact someone in our human resources desk because they do most everything with position budgeting rather than us.
Okay. The next question, we have heard that project budgeting will be available in the annual budgeting process. Any word on when this will be ready?
I actually have not heard about that myself. So I'll have to get back to the user about that one after asking around a little bit to find out when that's going to be available. So sorry, Javia.
If there is an amendment to the budget, how will it affect the spread option?
Well, budget amendments occur over the top of anything that's already been adopted. So basically, for any given account that has a budget, it keeps track of its adopted value and then budget amendments that happen to it separately. So if you were to do a spread on a budget, all of the individual spread transactions would just be adopted considered, budget adopted values into each of those months. So if you were to do a budget amendment, say 3 or 4 months in, that would just get added to the amount that is allocated to the budget at that month. So yeah, fortunately the system, keeps everything separated, and then for reporting purposes it'll actually add everything up. So an amendment wouldn't be able to accidentally overwrite or get rid of a spread or anything like that if the user's concerned about that.
Okay. Let's see, we're getting down to the end of our questions, so I'd like to remind people there's still time if you have questions to type them in. The next one we have is when a budget is initialized using prior year's expenditure, it actually uses the current year data, which wouldn't be complete. How can you base a budget on a full year's worth of data?
Okay, well, I'd have to see the particular situation that the user's talking about. I imagine, I know what they're talking about. Since it's using last year, if your previous budget year is still in progress, like say you're in budget year 2016 and you're doing budgeting for 2017, you don't know what your full year's worth of expenditures are just yet. I imagine the only way to get a fully accurate picture would be to only do your budgeting after an entire year, after the full year has passed. So, on the very last day of it or the first day of the next budget year, which, granted, by then you may want to have your budget stuff in place already at that point. I can look into that further for the user as well and see if I can get them more information on that. If there's, just offhand, I don't know if there's anything the system does to sort of extrapolate or anything like that. It may do that, so I'd have to look into it to find out.
Okay, great. And the last question, can you show us how to enter a budget amendment?
Sure. Okay. So in order to do a budget amendment, you're just going to go up into Financial Management and then Journals and then Journals. Okay, so we're just going to create a new journal here. Okay, department doesn't really matter. That's just for workflow and approval purposes. The thing that does matter, you want to make sure to choose the budget adjustment journal type off of the journal type menu. And then choose the fiscal year that you're going to be modifying the budget for. The GL date of the journal itself doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters on the journal are the GL dates of the individual transactions. So that is going to determine when those budget adjustments actually hit your accounts. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do an adjustment for 1/1 of 2017, and we'll just let's just hit that account right there. So budget adjustment journals, like with encumbrance adjustments, these can be one-sided transactions, so you don't have to have it balance with another opposite transaction for the same day and same fund or anything like that. If you're sending money from one account to another, you'd probably enter transactions that look like that, but you don't have to. You can just use this to just straight up increase the value of a budget or reduce it if you want to, without having to hit anything else at the same time. So once we've got our entries made, you just save again. And then we're just going to validate, approve, and post it. And then if we go into inquiries, we should be able to actually see the amendment that just took place. Okay, and as we can see, there's a $5,000 amendment right there on the first of the year. And that is how you do a budget adjustment.
Great. The next question is, please further clarify what is a budgeting transaction.
Okay, so transactions are individual items that you can attach to a budgeted account in order to sort of itemize the money that that account has allocated to it for particular purposes. So I'll just go back into our budget organization list here and just grab an account to add a transaction to as an example. Okay, so it looks like we have a couple accounts here that already have transactions on them, which is nice. So basically, in order to add transactions to account, you just highlight the accounts line and then hit the transactions button, and that will take you to the transactions page. So basically, what we've got here is the individual transactions on this account. So you can really use this for whatever you want to. We could add a new transaction if we wanted, say, like, if we know this account is going to be allocated money to pay for, I don't know, let's say you've got cell phone plans for, city issued cell phones for various users, and those cost, I don't know, $250 a year. We can do that. And then it actually adds that as an individual item. Now, it didn't automatically update the value of the account itself, but it will show us the balance of all the transactions that the account is facing. And if we want to, we can just hit apply transaction total as the budgeted amount. So now that 29 million and some odd is now flashed into the budgeted amount for that account. So if we go back out to budgeted accounts, we'll see that it now has that value in it. So one thing about budgeting transactions of both miscellaneous transactions, which are the ones that we add here, and position transactions, sometimes some of your accounts will auto-calculate, so they'll have, their box will be grayed out so you can't actually enter in a number in it. Unlike the white boxes, which you just have full manual control over. When a box is grayed out, it means for whatever reason it's set to automatically calculate its value based on something. And there's two main rules that come into play for that. So for one thing, the account has to be of a classification that uses either miscellaneous transactions or position budgeting as its initialization method. So all accounts have classifications on them, which you can set up the method for what they start with in here in the budget method list. So it looks like everything here initializes with zero balance, but we could change this. It's not going to be very frequent that all of your classifications initialize at zero. Some of them, will be set to initialize with position values instead, or miscellaneous transactions, especially for personnel expense accounts for payroll and things like that. So say if we just went in here and changed it to position budgeting, any accounts that have this classification, they would auto-calculate their value based on all position budgeting transactions at any level that they also have the position value checked for that budget level. So here in our annual budget levels under Company FM settings, you'll see that there are these check marks here. And whenever a transaction or position budgeting is checked, that means that any account that's at the level where it's checked off it will auto-calculate, provided it has those types of transactions on it, and its initialization method uses that. So we've had users sometimes who have position budgeted accounts that they've promoted their position values over to finance, but when they go into their budget accounts, they see that the box is white and they can manually change it, and it's not auto-calculating based on the total value of all the position budgets, even though the account classification is position budgeted. The reason for that is because the account is at one of these levels, and the level that it's at, this position budgeting checkbox is not checked. So the same thing basically goes for the transactions column, which is going to be used for miscellaneous transactions like what we were looking at there. So I just wanted to elaborate on that. I know that someone had asked about that in our previous session, so in case they're still here, they have the answer to that now. Alrighty.
Great. Now we do have 2 more questions at this point. On budget journal entries, I see the choices are increase or decrease. So for a revenue account, do we use a positive number and call it an increase, i.e. not debits and credits?
Yeah, that's right. Like with encumbrances, budget adjustment journals work on increases and decreases to the budgeted amount rather than debits and credits. So entering a positive amount will increase the dollar amount showing for that account, and entering a negative dollar amount will decrease the amount of budget that that account has for it, which results to the same thing regardless of whether it's a revenue or expense account. Either way, if you increase a revenue account, it means you're anticipating earning more, and if you increase an expense account, you're anticipating spending more. Just, like how it would normally work when you're actually doing expenses in your AP or in revenue collections.
Great. Okay. And at this point, perhaps our last question, unless somebody types something else in. When entering transactions, what is the effect of not selecting apply transactional total? How will it affect reports?
Well, it won't affect reports any more than it affects your initial view of, what that account looks like it has in it. All that button does is it immediately compiles the total value of transactions, and then it replaces the number that account has with that value in it. So yeah, if you've got nothing filled out for that account, but you've got transactions on it and you run a report, it's still going to show $0 budgeted for that account. But if the report also shows the transactions side by side with it, like the budget worksheet report does, or it's able to if you set it up to do so, it'll show that, yeah, there's all these transactions, but the actual amount that's budgeted for the account is still 0 despite that. So the Apply Transaction Totals button, it doesn't enable a continuous setting for that account. It only applies immediately when you press it. And if you enter in new transactions or anything, you'd have to hit it again in order to update the amount that account has.
And so one of our next question is, I do not see apply transaction total. Is that a special permission?
There shouldn't be a special permission for that. If you can get to the page and the page is enabled for adding transactions and such, you should be able to access it. What I'm thinking it is, there's the state of the account itself. It's probably auto-calculating already based on some sort of criteria, so the system just doesn't allow you to use the apply to a transaction total. It doesn't let you do that because it's already auto-calculating based on some sort of characteristic. If the user's in a specific situation where that's happening, they'd probably want to call into the support desk to have it looked at, so we can determine exactly why that is.
Terrific. Well, at this point, that looks like it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thank you all for coming. I hope everybody, got something out of this, and good luck with your budget work this year.